I always thought fast food was just a guilty pleasure. But after my last visit to KFC, the hunger became something darker, something I couldn't escape. It was a regular Friday night at the KFC, the kind of night where people flooded the restaurant after work to indulge in crispy chicken and fries. Families gathered, couples sat huddled in booths, and the drive-thru was backed up as usual. The enticing aroma of deep-fried food wafted through the air, drawing more customers into the glowing red and white building. No one could have known that something darker lurked beneath the surface of those delicious meals. For me, KFC was a once-a-month indulgence. I liked the crispy chicken wings and mashed potatoes, but I rarely craved fast food. It was just a guilty pleasure, something I enjoyed from time to time. But something changed after my last visit. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The taste of the chicken haunted me, its crisp, savory perfection lingering on my tongue long after I had left the restaurant. At first, I brushed it off as just a random craving. But the next day, as I drove past the restaurant, my mouth watered uncontrollably. I pulled into the drive-thru without even thinking, ordering the same meal I had eaten the day before. This wasn't like me. I usually stuck to a healthy diet, but the thought of the chicken was irresistible. The crispy skin, the juicy meat, it was as if my body was begging for it. It didn't stop there. The next day, I found myself back in line, hungry for more. I wasn't the only one. All over town, regulars began visiting KFC more frequently than before. It became common to see the same faces at the restaurant multiple times a day, their orders growing larger with each visit. People who once ate at KFC occasionally were now there daily, sometimes even multiple times in the same day. Something was happening, but no one questioned it. The food was too good to resist. After 2 weeks of this constant craving, I noticed something strange. I had lost weight despite eating more KFC than ever before. My appetite for anything other than the chicken had diminished entirely. My skin had taken on a sickly pale hue, and dark circles formed under my eyes. But none of that mattered to me. All I could think about was getting my next meal from KFC. At work, I struggled to focus. My hands shook whenever I hadn't had chicken in a few hours. At night, my dreams were filled with the sound of frying oil and the smell of freshly cooked wings. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. My body ached for that familiar taste. I wasn't alone. Similar changes were happening to others in town. People began to look sickly, losing weight rapidly, their skin graying and their eyes hollowing out. But they kept returning to KFC. Every day, the line outside the restaurant grew longer, even spilling onto the street at times. It was as if the entire town had become obsessed with the food. Local doctors began noticing the pattern. Many of their patients reported similar symptoms: sudden weight loss, shaking hands, insomnia, and an insatiable craving for fast food. But no one had any concrete answers. Some suspected food poisoning, while others believed it to be a new strain of flu. But the truth was much worse. Dr. Sarah Miller, a local physician, grew concerned when several of her patients came in with identical symptoms. All of them mentioned eating frequently at KFC. At first, she dismissed it as a coincidence, but when more and more people began showing the same signs, she couldn't ignore it any longer. Sarah decided to investigate. She visited the KFC herself, watching as people devoured their meals with wild, desperate eyes. It was unnerving. And after ordering a small meal, she took it back to her office for testing. What she found horrified her. The chicken contained traces of a highly addictive chemical compound, one that was commonly found in synthetic drugs. The more of it someone consumed, the more dependent they became on it. The chemical altered brain chemistry, amplifying pleasure responses, and causing severe withdrawal symptoms when not consumed regularly. Sarah immediately alerted the authorities, but as they prepared to shut down the KFC, something unexpected happened. Word of the investigation spread quickly, and the addicts, the ones who had fallen into the grip of KFC's sinister recipe, panicked. They stormed the restaurant, desperate to get their fix before it was shut down. The peaceful atmosphere of the small town shattered as hundreds of people flooded the building, tearing through the staff, grabbing whatever food they could find. Inside, chaos reigned. People shoved and fought, clawing for the last pieces of chicken. Glass shattered, trays flew, and the air was thick with desperation. Some of the staff tried to stop them, but they were overpowered. The drug had turned ordinary people into ravenous animals, willing to do anything for one more bite. I was among them. I had lost my job by now, too consumed by my addiction to keep showing up to work. My clothes hung off my thin frame, and my once bright eyes had dulled into hollow, sunken pits. I clawed my way to the front of the crowd, my mind blank except for one thought: chicken. I had to have it. The police arrived, but it was too late. By the time they managed to regain control, the restaurant had been ransacked. Empty buckets of chicken lay strewn across the floor, and many of the addicts were lying unconscious, having gorged themselves to the point of collapse. But even after all that, the cravings didn't stop. Once the KFC was shut down, the real horror began. The town descended into chaos as the addicts went into withdrawal. The symptoms were unbearable: violent shaking, hallucinations, and crippling pain. Many couldn't handle it. I was among the worst affected. I spent my days locked in my apartment, trembling uncontrollably, my mind unraveling from the constant hunger that no other food could satisfy. The once pleasant smell of fried chicken now haunted my nightmares, but I would have given anything for just one more bite. It was already well past midnight when I pulled into the empty parking lot of the KFC where my girlfriend, Alice, worked. The neon lights of the restaurant cast long shadows across the lot, and the building stood like a glowing beacon against the darkness of the night. It was quiet, too quiet for my liking, but I shrugged it off. I wasn't used to visiting her so late, but tonight was an exception. Alice had been working overtime, and our plans for dinner had been canceled at the last minute. She had promised she'd make it up to me, but I missed her terribly and wanted to surprise her. I checked my phone. No messages. Alice usually texted me whenever she had a moment, but tonight there had been nothing since she'd texted me about working overtime. A sinking feeling formed in my stomach, but I told myself to relax. She was probably just busy. I stepped out of the car and started toward the entrance. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and I was greeted by the fluorescent lights of the empty dining area. The place looked like it was about to close. Only a few scattered tables remained uncleaned, and the scent of fried chicken hung heavily in the air. But something felt off. There was no sign of Alice, just a lone employee standing behind the counter. The man didn't look like any of Alice's coworkers I had seen before. He was tall, gaunt, and had a messy appearance, his KFC uniform wrinkled and stained. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face, casting deep shadows over his eyes. There was something unsettling about the way the man stood, his hands gripping the counter tightly, as if he was trying to contain something or someone. "Excuse me," I said, walking up to the counter. "I'm looking for Alice. She was working tonight. Is she in the back?" The man looked up slowly, his eyes cold and distant. "No Alice here," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly. "Place is closed. You should go." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? She texted me earlier. She was working the late shift." The man shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flicking to the kitchen doors behind him for a split second before he quickly turned back to me. "I said there's no Alice here," he repeated, this time more forcefully. "Leave." I narrowed my eyes, my senses now fully on alert. Something was wrong, very wrong. I could feel it in my bones. The way the man was acting, the way he avoided eye contact, it all screamed suspicion. "I'm not leaving until I see her," I said firmly, my voice growing more aggressive. "Call her out here." The man stepped back, clearly growing agitated. "You need to leave," he said in an angry tone, his hand moving toward the pocket of his apron. "Now." But I was already moving. I shoved past the counter, ignoring the man's protests, and made my way toward the back of the restaurant. I slammed open the door to the kitchen, my heart racing. I had to find Alice. The kitchen was dimly lit, the metal countertops gleaming under the faint lights. I scanned the room, but there was no sign of her. "Alice!" I called, my voice echoing through the empty kitchen. Alice, where are you? A muffled noise came from the far end of the room. My head snapped in the direction of the sound. It was faint, like a small cry or a whimper coming from behind one of the storage doors. Without hesitation, I sprinted toward it and yanked open the door. Inside, bound and gagged on the floor, was Alice. Her eyes were wide with fear, her face streaked with tears. The sight of her in such a vulnerable state made my blood run cold. Alice, I gasped, dropping to my knees beside her. I quickly untied the gag from her mouth and began loosening the ropes around her wrists. What happened? Who did this to you? He's still here, Alice whispered hoarsely, her voice trembling. He's dangerous. You have to get out of here. He'll kill you. My heart pounded in my chest, but I refused to leave her side. Not without you, I said firmly. I'm getting you out of here. But before I could finish untying her, the door to the kitchen slammed shut with a loud bang. I whirled around, and standing in the doorway was the man from the counter, holding a large kitchen knife in his hand. His eyes were wild, his face twisted in a menacing sneer. You shouldn't have come back here, the man growled, advancing toward us. Now I'm going to have to deal with you too. My heart raced as I scrambled to my feet, positioning myself between the man and Alice. You're not touching her, I said, my voice steady despite the fear surging through me. The man laughed darkly. You think you can stop me? He taunted, waving the knife in front of him. I was going to take care of her nice and slow. But now you've just made things more interesting. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. I had no weapon, no plan, but I couldn't let this psychopath get near Alice. I had to think fast. Suddenly, the man lunged at me with the knife. I dodged to the side just in time, the blade narrowly missing my arm. I grabbed a nearby frying basket and swung it at the man, hitting him in the chest. The man stumbled back, surprised by the attack, but quickly recovered, his eyes blazing with anger. You're going to regret that, the man hissed, raising the knife again. I knew I couldn't fight this guy head on, not with a knife in his hand. I needed to find a way to disarm him. My eyes darted around the kitchen, searching for something I could use. My gaze landed on a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. Without wasting a second, I darted toward the extinguisher, yanking it from its mount. The man charged at me again, but I swung the heavy extinguisher with all my strength, knocking the knife out of the man's hand. The weapon clattered to the floor, and I didn't hesitate. I sprayed the man in the face with the extinguisher, the thick foam blinding him. The man screamed in fury, stumbling back as he tried to wipe the foam from his eyes. I took the opportunity to kick the knife further away and grab Alice, pulling her to her feet. Come on, I urged, half carrying her. As we bolted toward the exit, we burst out of the kitchen and into the empty dining area. My heart raced as we made a run for the front door, but I knew we weren't safe yet. I could hear the man behind us still screaming in rage as he wiped the extinguisher foam from his face. Just as we reached the door, I heard a crash behind us. I glanced over my shoulder to see the man charging toward us again, this time wielding a metal spatula like a weapon. I pushed Alice through the door first, and we sprinted toward my car. I fumbled with the keys for a moment, my hands shaking, but finally managed to unlock the doors. We both dove inside, slamming the doors shut just as the man reached us. The man banged on the windows, his face twisted in fury, but I jammed the key into the ignition and floored the gas. The tires screeched as we sped out of the parking lot, leaving the man standing in the rearview mirror, growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared into the night. I didn't slow down until we were far from the KFC, my hands gripping the steering wheel, so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart was still pounding in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Beside me, Alice was trembling, tears streaming down her face. I reached over and gently took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. You're safe now, I whispered, my voice soft but steady. I've got you. It was just another late shift for me, the kind of night I had grown accustomed to in my 2 years working at KFC. The streets outside were quiet. The usual drunks stumbling from the bars hadn't yet made their way in for their greasy midnight snack, and I enjoyed the peaceful hum of the kitchen. The smell of fried chicken wafted through the air, and the sound of the fryers and the distant whir of the drive-thru headset filled the small space. There were only 2 other employees working that night. Steve, the shift manager, who was in the back checking inventory, and Jess, a college student working part-time, who was cleaning tables. I had always preferred the late-night shifts. I was an insomniac by nature, and there was something soothing about working when the rest of the world was asleep. But something about tonight felt different. It wasn't anything obvious, just an uneasy feeling that had settled in my stomach as soon as I'd walked into the restaurant. It started subtly, like most hauntings do. The first thing I noticed was the cold. A strange chill swept through the restaurant, despite the fryers and grills blazing hot. I felt it wrap around me like a cold, damp fog. Goosebumps prickled along my arms, not trying to shake off the odd sensation. I glanced toward Jess, who was wiping down the tables with her headphones in, completely oblivious. Maybe the air conditioning kicked in too hard, I thought, but when I turned to check the thermostat, it was set at its usual temperature. The uneasy feeling lingered. I pushed the thought aside and returned to the counter, glancing up at the drive-thru monitor. A lone car had just pulled into the lane, the headlights casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. I grabbed my headset and took the order. "Welcome to KFC. What can I get you tonight?" There was a brief silence. Then a low, distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "I'm here." I blinked, confused. I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" The same unsettling voice replied, "I'm here." My heart skipped a beat. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see Steve playing a prank on me, but he was still in the back. Jess was sweeping the floor, her back turned, headphones still in place. I cleared my throat and tried again. "I'm sorry, we're not understanding you. Can you please place your order?" There was no response. The drive-thru camera flickered, and when I looked back, the car had disappeared. I stared at the monitor, confused. Cars didn't just vanish. I didn't believe my eyes. So I left the counter and went to the back room, where Steve was checking the freezer inventory. "Hey, did you see that car just now? The one in the drive-thru?" Steve barely glanced up. "What car? No one's come through for the last half hour." I frowned. "There was a car, I swear, but now it's gone." Steve shook his head, chuckling. "Maybe it's the ghost." I raised an eyebrow. "Ghost?" "Yeah," Steve said, still laughing. "Didn't Jess tell you? This place is supposed to be haunted. Something about a kid who died in an accident near here years ago. People say they've seen him hanging around the drive-thru late at night. It's just an old story to freak out new employees, though. Nothing to worry about." I forced a smile, but I was scared. The cold feeling had returned, creeping up my arms like ice. I went back to the front counter, my mind buzzing with Steve's words. Haunted? I'd never been one to believe in ghosts, but there was something undeniably unsettling about the night. The restaurant was too quiet, too still. I busied myself by organizing the sauce packets, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. As I bent down to grab more packets from the shelf beneath the counter, I heard it again. A low, almost imperceptible whisper. "Maya." My heart froze. Slowly I stood up, my eyes scanning the empty dining area. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Maya." I spun around, but there was no one there. Jess was still cleaning, her headphones firmly in place, and Steve was in the back. My pulse raced, my breath quickening. The whisper had sounded close, right by my ear. Taking a deep breath, I turned back to the counter. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, I thought. But as I reached for the cash register, the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then they went out completely, plunging the entire restaurant into darkness. My heart pounded in my chest. I fumbled for my phone, the screen casting a weak glow around me. "Steve?" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. "Jess?" Nothing. The darkness pressed in around me, thick and suffocating. My breath came in shallow gasps as I moved toward the back room. My phone held out in front of me like a shield. The faint light barely illuminated my path, but it was better than nothing. As I neared the backroom door, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. A soft, wet sound, like the squelch of footsteps on a rainy sidewalk. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was right behind me. I whirled around, my phone's light catching nothing but empty space, but the sound continued, circling me as if someone or something was walking around me in the darkness. Panic gripped me, and I stumbled backward, slamming into the door of the freezer. Maya. The voice was unmistakable this time, a harsh, guttural whisper right in my ear. I screamed, dropping my phone, the light blinking out as it hit the floor. I was plunged into total darkness. My heart raced as I clawed at the door behind me, trying to find the handle. I had to get out. I had to... Suddenly, the lights flickered back on. I blinked, my breath coming in short gasps. The restaurant was still. The cold, oppressive air had vanished, replaced by the familiar warmth of the fryers. Steve and Jess were standing in the doorway to the back room, staring at me with wide eyes. "What the hell just happened?" Steve asked, his voice low. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. Has it all been in my head? The cold, the whisper, the footsteps. Had I imagined it? Steve stepped forward, his expression softening. "Hey, you okay?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "Yeah," I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm fine." For the rest of the shift, I worked in silence, my mind replaying the night's events over and over. The cold, the whisper, the flickering lights, they all pointed to one thing. The haunting was real. The stories were true. And as I locked up the restaurant that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Something or someone was watching me, waiting. I never worked another night shift again. I had been working at KFC for about 6 months. It was a quiet job, nestled in the corner of a small suburban town, where the most exciting thing that happened was the occasional order mistake or an irate customer demanding extra napkins. Life wasn't thrilling, but it was comfortable, and I appreciated the simplicity of it. Every day was routine, the early morning rush, the lunch orders, and the long stretches of quiet time in the late afternoon when most people stayed home. In the corner of the restaurant, near the register, there was a new addition to the decor. A statue of a man, tall and dressed like a KFC employee, complete with a name tag and a tray in hand. It was a strange addition, something I didn't quite understand, but the manager, Mr. Gray, had insisted that it gave the place character. The statue looked lifelike, far too realistic for comfort. Its skin had an uncanny pallor, its eyes were glossy but seemingly aware. I had joked with my colleagues, saying that if I stared at the statue long enough, I thought it might blink. "I don't like it," said Jenny, one of my coworkers, during our break. "It gives me the creeps." I laughed it off. "Yeah, it's a little weird, but Mr. Gray seems really proud of it. Probably cost a fortune, and you know how tight he is with money." Mr. Gray, the manager, was an odd man, quiet, often keeping to himself, and always disappearing into his office for hours at a time. No one ever knew what he did back there, but no one bothered to ask either. He ran the place smoothly enough, and as long as the paychecks came on time, the staff didn't complain. One evening, as the dinner rush began to die down, Jenny was cleaning up near the statue when something caught her eye. "Hey!" she hissed, calling me over. I ambled across the floor, wiping my hands on my apron. "What is it?" I asked, annoyed by the interruption. "Look," she whispered, pointing toward the statue. I squinted, unsure what she was referring to, until I noticed it. A small dark line was trickling from the corner of the statue's fingernail. I leaned in closer, my face inches away from the hand. "Is that blood?" I muttered in disbelief. Jenny took a step back, her face pale. "That's not right. How could a statue bleed?" I shook my head, my heart pounding as I straightened up. "It's probably some weird paint or something," I suggested, but the unease in my voice betrayed my uncertainty. "But we should tell Mr. Gray." We hurried into the back, finding Mr. Gray sitting at his desk, looking through some papers. "Mr. Gray," I started, my voice shaky. "There's something wrong with the statue." Mr. Gray looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean, wrong?" Blood, Jenny whispered, unable to say more. There's blood coming from its nails. For a moment, Mr. Gray's face flickered, a shadow passing over his features. But then he smiled, an odd, strained smile. It's just paint. It probably chipped and got wet. I'll take a look at it later. Don't worry yourselves. But something in his eyes made us feel that we should worry. As the night wore on, the feeling of dread only grew. I couldn't stop glancing over at the statue. The sense that something was terribly wrong worried me. Finally, when we were closing up, I told Jenny, we needed to take matters into our own hands. Let's take a closer look, I said. Armed with a flashlight, the two of us approached the statue again. This time we both noticed it. More blood, not just from the nails, but from the corner of the mouth, a faint sticky trail, barely noticeable in the dim light. This isn't right, I muttered. We need to call the police, Jenny whispered, her voice trembling. Reluctantly, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. When the officers arrived, they initially seemed skeptical, but when they saw the blood for themselves, their expressions turned grave. They cordoned off the area and called in forensic experts. Within hours, the KFC was swarming with law enforcement, and the statue was carefully moved to be examined. What they found inside horrified them all. The statue wasn't a statue at all. It was hollow, and inside were human remains, parts of a body, stuffed into the mannequin-like shell. The smell was masked by chemicals, but now that the truth was revealed, there was no denying it. The blood seeping from the fingernails and mouth had come from the body parts hidden inside. The police immediately detained everyone in the restaurant for questioning. Jenny and I were pale, stunned by the revelation. We couldn't believe what we had been working beside for weeks, unknowingly standing so close to something so gruesome. But the most shocking development came when the police searched Mr. Gray's office. Inside, they found evidence that pointed to him: blood-stained clothing, a knife, and photographs of a woman, her face circled in red ink. It didn't take long for the truth to come to light. Mr. Gray's wife had been missing for weeks. He had told us that she had gone on a vacation, but in reality, there had been no vacation. The woman in the photographs was his wife. The police quickly pieced together the horrific story. Mr. Gray had murdered her, chopped her body into pieces, and then, in a sick attempt to hide the evidence, stuffed her remains into the statue that he had proudly displayed in his restaurant. The final pieces of the puzzle came together when they searched his home. There they found more evidence of the crime: a blood-stained bathroom, signs of a violent struggle, and an empty space where a freezer once sat. It was clear that Mr. Gray had planned this meticulously, thinking that hiding the body in such plain sight would keep him from suspicion. As the police led Mr. Gray out of the KFC in handcuffs, Jenny and I stood together, watching in stunned silence. Our quiet, uneventful job had become the site of a horrifying discovery that we would never forget. The next few weeks were surreal. The KFC was closed indefinitely as the investigation continued, and I found myself haunted by the image of the statue, by the thought that I had been standing so close to something so horrifying. Jenny quit not long after, unable to shake the nightmares. I, too, eventually left the town, moving far away to start fresh. But no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the memory of the statue. It lingered in the corners of my mind, a reminder of how easily horror could hide in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice. It was a calm, breezy Saturday evening when I decided my son, Ethan, and I deserved a break from home-cooked meals. It had been a long, stressful week filled with Zoom meetings and school assignments. Fast food sounded like a perfect remedy for the exhaustion that weighed us down. "Mom, can we get KFC tonight?" Ethan, my curious 8-year-old with an insatiable appetite, had been asking for days. I smiled at him through the rearview mirror as we drove toward the nearest KFC. "KFC it is, but just this once, okay? You know how greasy it is?" Ethan smiled, clearly already imagining a bucket of crispy fried chicken. As we approached the drive-thru, the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange hue across the sky. It felt like the perfect way to end the day. We were next in line, waiting behind a gray sedan. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 6:45 p.m. The smell of fried chicken wafted through the open windows, teasing our senses. Just as I was about to ask Ethan if he wanted coleslaw or mashed potatoes, I caught sight of a large, beat-up truck pulling into the drive-thru behind us. The truck roared with the sound of an engine that hadn't seen maintenance in years. Its driver, a rugged man in his 40s, leaned out the window and muttered something under his breath. He was unshaven, wearing a greasy tank top, and had an unsettling intensity in his eyes. I didn't think much of it. There was no reason to. People came to the drive-thru hungry and in a rush all the time. I figured he was just impatient. Yet, as I inched the car forward to the order speaker, the man revved his engine behind me aggressively, startling both me and Ethan. "Mom, what's that guy doing?" Ethan asked, his voice shaking with unease. "Nothing, honey. He's just in a hurry. Don't worry about it." I tried to calm my son, though my own nerves had started to tighten. I placed our order, a family bucket, fries, mashed potatoes, and gravy, with 2 sodas. The speaker crackled as the employee confirmed the total, and I drove forward to the first window to pay. The truck behind me surged forward, inching closer to my rear bumper. The man honked loudly, his face twisted with frustration. I glanced nervously at the side mirror. He was close enough now that I could see his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. I could feel my heart rate rising. The way he was behaving made me feel trapped. There was no way to reverse, and the car ahead of me was still at the second window, waiting for their order. "Mom, I'm scared," Ethan said, his voice small and scared from the back seat. I tried to swallow the lump forming in my throat. I took a deep breath. "It's okay, Ethan. We're just going to get our food and head home." As I paid for our meal at the first window, the truck driver behind me suddenly started yelling. His voice boomed, thick with rage. He leaned out his window, his arm flailing in the air, as if the very act of waiting was too much to bear. "Come on, move," he screamed, slamming his fist on the side of his truck door. My hand shook as I handed over my card to the KFC employee. The cashier, a young man who seemed more interested in his phone than the growing commotion behind us, offered no acknowledgement of the escalating situation. I hurried forward to the next window to pick up our food, praying that the car ahead of me would speed up so we could leave. But as I waited, the man behind us lost control of his temper. Without warning, his truck lurched forward, smashing into the back of my car. The impact sent the car jolting forward. I gasped, gripping the steering wheel, as the force nearly knocked my head into it. I turned to check on Ethan, who had been safely strapped in his seat, but the terror on his face broke my heart. "Mom," he cried, tears welling up in his eyes. "It's okay, Ethan. It's going to be okay." But the words felt hollow. I could feel my pulse racing, my mind spinning. I could hear the man's truck engine revving again, a threatening growl. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone to call 911. But before I could, the truck slammed into us again. Harder this time. My phone slipped out of my hand and fell between the seats. The air was filled with the scent of burning rubber and the sound of the truck's roaring engine. Panic surged through my body. I had to get away. The car ahead of me finally moved forward to exit the drive-thru, and I stomped on the gas, pulling up to the window, where my food was handed to me in a hurry by a confused employee. But there was no time to explain. As I grabbed the food, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the man behind me leap out of his truck. He stormed toward the car, eyes wild with rage, his fists clenched. "Oh my God!" I whispered, fear gripping me. I slammed my foot on the gas, peeling out of the drive-thru as fast as I could. "Mom, is he following us?" Ethan cried from the back seat, his voice shaking. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror. Sure enough, the truck was behind us again, closing the distance fast. I could see the man gripping the wheel with both hands, his face contorted with fury. Think, I screamed inside my head. Where could I go? "Mom, what are we going to do?" My heart pounded in my chest as I swerved onto a nearby side street. I had to lose him. I turned left and right, weaving through the narrow, suburban roads, my breath coming in sharp gasps. But the truck stayed with us. No matter which way I turned, the man was relentless, his headlights glaring in my rearview mirror. Just when I thought I couldn't keep it up anymore, I spotted a police car parked at a gas station up ahead. Without thinking, I veered sharply into the station, slamming the brakes as I came to a stop right beside the squad car. The truck skidded to a halt behind us, but the man hesitated when he saw the police car. The officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man, stepped out, noticing the commotion immediately. "What's going on here?" the officer demanded, his hand resting on his holster. I jumped out of the car, rushing over to the officer, my voice shaking as I explained everything that had happened. Ethan, too terrified to move, stayed in the car, his eyes wide and glued to the truck behind us. The man in the truck, realizing he'd gone too far, suddenly threw his truck into reverse. He tried to back out of the gas station, but the officer was quick, stepping in front of his vehicle and commanding him to stop. Within moments, more police cars arrived. The man was dragged out of his truck, handcuffed and shoved into the back of a squad car. His anger had finally run out. I stood by my car, trembling, my arms wrapped around Ethan as the police handled the situation. The nightmare was over. "Mom, are we safe now?" Ethan asked. "Yes, honey," I whispered, stroking his hair. "We're safe now." It was an ordinary Wednesday evening, the kind of midweek monotony that made me suggest we get out of the house for a while. Claire and I had been together for over 10 years, and though the routine of married life was comforting, lately something about her seemed off. She was quieter than usual, her thoughts often elsewhere. I could tell something was weighing her down, but every time I tried to bring it up, she either brushed it off or changed the subject. That evening, as we sat on the couch, I glanced at Claire, who was staring out the window, her fingers nervously tapping the armrest. The air between us felt thick, the kind of tension that comes from too many unspoken words. Hoping to break the silence, I suggested we go out to grab something quick for dinner. "KFC? We haven't had that in ages," I said, trying to sound upbeat. Claire turned her gaze to me, her eyes distant. "Sure, whatever," she muttered, her voice flat. We got into the car, and I could feel the tension following us like a shadow. I glanced over at her several times as we drove, noticing how she was fidgeting with her hands, wringing them in her lap. Something was definitely on her mind. "Are you okay, Claire?" I finally asked, my tone gentle. "Yeah," she replied harshly. I sighed. "You've been acting strange for days. If something's wrong, you can talk to me, you know." "I said I'm fine," Claire snapped, her eyes flashing with irritation. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my patience wearing thin. "No, you're not fine. Don't you think I can tell when something's bothering you? We're not strangers, Claire. Talk to me." "Just drop it," she shouted, her voice sharp and bitter. "Not everything's about you." The words stung more than I expected. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. We had been through rough patches before, but this felt different. Claire's attitude wasn't just frustration. It felt like she was shutting me out completely. "Fine," I muttered under my breath, turning my focus back to the road. The rest of the drive was silent, the kind of silence that felt like a wall between us. We arrived at the KFC and pulled into the drive-thru. "Do you even know what you want?" I asked, the irritation still lingering in my voice. "Whatever, just order for me," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper now. I ordered our usual, a family bucket with fries, coleslaw, and drinks. We pulled up to the window to pay, and as the employee handed us the food, the awkwardness between us felt suffocating. I drove to a nearby parking lot, hoping that sitting and eating in peace might ease the tension. We sat in silence as we unwrapped our food. The smell of fried chicken filled the car, but neither of us seemed particularly hungry. I stole glances at Claire between bites, watching as she picked at her food, barely eating. I wanted to say something, to break the icy silence, but I didn't know where to start. Minutes passed and the silence only grew heavier. I was about to speak when suddenly Claire let out a sharp gasp. Her hands flew to her head, her face contorting in a mix of fear and confusion. "Claire?" I said, my heart pounding. "What's wrong?" Without answering, Claire threw her door open and bolted from the car. She ran across the parking lot, her hair whipping behind her, her movements frantic. My heart raced. "Claire!" I yelled, scrambling out of the car and chasing after her. "Claire, stop!" But she didn't stop. She kept running, as if she were trying to outrun something invisible. My lungs burned as I tried to catch up, but Claire was fast. Faster than I had ever seen her move. She disappeared around the corner of a nearby building, and by the time I rounded it, she was gone. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Now, 7 years have passed, and Claire is still missing. Not a day goes by that I don't think about her. I know deep down that the answers might never come. Claire is gone, and whatever drove her to run that night took her far beyond my reach. And still, I wait. Thanks for watching and sharing this story with us. If you have a story like this one, feel free to submit it via email mentioned in the description. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing content. See you in the next video.